What did you read this month? I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and I thought it would be fun to do a bit of an end of the month roundup. There's always so many comics out there and we don't get a chance to talk about a lot of them. So let's do a bit of a casual catch up. What are you reading? And I'll tell you what I'm reading. That kind of deal. Now this won't be everything I read, but it'll be the things that left impressions. Some things are just carrying on as they've been carrying on. They also won't all be new. I don't know about you, but I'm not always keeping up with everything at the same pace. Some things more so than others. Or sometimes you're late. It happens. So it's gonna be rapid fire. Not all recommends, but the ones that I do recommend, I'll let you know. And then you can decide for yourself, or let me know if you disagree. Okay, so in no particular order, but we're gonna start off with DC. Absolute Power #2. This by Mark Waid and Dan Mora. We covered issue 1 on this channel. This is an event that's going to lead into DC All In and Absolute. It's the Amanda Waller and her trinity of evil and all of her amazos. They're taking over the DC universe. They're capturing the heroes. They're sucking out their powers from them. They've blocked off the multiverse and the time stream, all kinds of things. Everybody's being neutralized and now they have to fight back. Issue 2, or chapter as they call it, was called Resistance, and it was very much focused on the heroes trying to figure out what to do and who's still out and having to contend with the fact that even their sanctuaries weren't safe. If you liked issue 1, you'll probably like this one. Although it must be said that the tie-ins, both Task Force 7 and the main books, have started to do some of the detail lifting in terms of how characters got to certain locations, what their status is. For example, and this is one of the bigger ones, at the end of issue 1 of Absolute Power, Superman was shot and bleeding out. And now in this issue 2, he's already on his feet again in his recovery suit. This is because he had surgery over in his own book, which there's no editor's note to. So there's a bit of an assumption here that you're reading all the things, and because of that, the issue feels a bit fast. That being said, the art is gorgeous. There are some nice character moments, some fun cameos, and John feels like he has more stakes attached to him than he has in a while. I also did read all the tie-ins for clarity's sake, and they were useful in that sense. They varied in quality though. Since we already mentioned it, Superman. This month was Superman 17. This was by Joshua Williamson with art by Jamal Campbell. Superman is on a quest with Zatanna to find the magic users, and it features editor's notes, so you know exactly where to place it in context to Absolute Power, which is good because it's tying in aggressively. This comic wrapped up its main storyline before this event started, so it feels less like it's being interrupted than some of the other books. This one has some strong Clark character work as he contends with having had to fight his son, blow up his fortress, just everything collapsing. This also doesn't really pertain to anything but memoryless Lex. That is hard to say. Lex without his memory is growing a ginger beard. This is an exciting issue with lots of magical characters and a disgruntled Superman getting to go up against magic. It's just another solid issue in a series that's been steadily good since its inception. Next, Green Lantern 14, which features another Sorrow Lantern sighting. I think the most fun part for me of that video that I made on the Sorrow Lantern was all of you roasting Nathan in the comments. Poor Nate. You're just gonna make him sadder. The main story in this is by Jeremy Adams with art by Fernando Pesserin. It also is an Absolute Power tie-in with a captured Hal having to escape Gamora Island, Waller's fortress, where she's keeping the heroes and a lot of their tech and stuff. Side note, this one also has good editor's notes. I'm just noting them all over the place. You also get to see what other characters are doing, like Alan Scott or Carol Ferris. Also, you get a little bit of the galactic plot. This one is not as seamless a tie-in because Hal's main plot was so off in space that it does need to slow down a bit to do this event. But overall, it's fairly smooth. This one has some fun action beats, like Hal using the Condiment King's weapons. It's a very sassy outing for Hal, but not one that puts him at so much of an advantage that becomes irritating. I even got a clumsy Hal panel, the true Hal. This issue also has a backup that is building up the Green Lantern universe as it pertains to Theros and his bid for galactic control. It's very reminiscent of the Bronze Age backups where they would expand the universe with the tales of the core. So on the whole, if you like Green Lantern things, this was a fun Green Lantern one. Last DC one I'll highlight, or we'll be here all day. World's Finest 30, written by Mark Waid with art by Gleb Melnikov. Death in Paradise. This one is a throwback story to the Trinity's first adventure, in quotes. They've had so many first adventures at this point. World's Finest oftentimes feels like it's off doing its own thing. Every now and again it has hints as to how it's going to or does tie into what's going on in the main universe. You can read it without having to worry about the other ongoing stuff. For the most part, there was an arc that heavily tied into Kingdom Come and the characters that Mark Waid created there. But on the whole, it does feel like classic versions of the characters so far just doing stuff, time recording. And the art has always been standout. If you're looking for some standard superhero fun, this one I'd recommend. Oh, and of course I've been reading Gotham City Sirens, but if you've been following this channel, you know that. It's been weekly, we've been doing week by week. Features Punchline, my beloved. It's funny because I keep up with all her appearances. It makes me seem way more obsessed with the character than I am. It's just interesting to track a character's growth. I'm probably gonna do the same thing with the Sorrow Lantern. Or maybe I'll fall off like I did with Red Canary and Flatline. Who knows? I should catch up with them. And now for something completely different. Indies! I read a lot of them and we don't often get a chance to talk about them. So let's go. Also, I'm sure some of you are gonna disagree about these being called indies, but others Helen of Wyndhorn #3. This came out a while ago and there's been some delays, but that just gave me time to catch up. Although if you're keeping up with it, I can see it being frustrating. This series is by Tom King with art by Bilkis Evely, so the same creative team behind Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. It was the art that drew me into this. It's just a gorgeous book, and parts of it are set in a high fantasy realm, so that's really fun to look at. The overall story is about the unveiling of the story of Helen of Wyndhorn's family history and legacy, from her grandfather and father to herself. Her father was known for writing novels that were considered fiction, but as we learn, were based on a real realm. That comes to be discovered by her, his daughter. After his death, she is brought back to the estate of her grandfather. The framing device thus far, while functional, which is each issue the history is having migrated to a different person or venue, hasn't quite come into focus purpose-wise, outside the themes around lost history. However, the main story is fairly compelling because of the character work on Helen. If you read the first issue and find Helen interesting and the idea of how she's going to connect to this fantasy otherworld, then you'll most likely enjoy this. If not, then it may not be up your alley. Issue 3 spent the most time in the otherworld time recording and hinting at the tragedies that haunt the characters. I'm curious to see where this one goes. It feels like it's going to need an impactful ending to bring everything together. However, even if it doesn't, it's still going to be beautiful because the art. I'm all caught up on Rook Exodus, Redcoat, and Geiger. Of the three, Rook Exodus is my favorite. The story of the struggle for survival on a dying world by the Wardens, those being people who control the animals on this terraformed planet that is slowly breaking down, is a compelling one. Written by Geoff with art by Jason Fabok, it's not shy about its ponderings on the relationship between humans, animals, and their environments. I was fortunate enough to get to talk to the creators where they laid out their entire thought process behind the world and developing the characters and themes. It was all really fascinating. I'll link it below, so if you're interested in hearing more about how the series came to be and just the process behind it, it might be something you want to check out. The story's not overwhelmed by its themes though. The imagery is really cool. The animals, the environments, it's just a pleasure to look at. And the characters are starting to get more and more fleshed out as the stakes rise. Rook, the protagonist, is starting to get invested in saving the world and the survivors, whereas before he was more apathetic. And the villain, Ursa, with his giant bear army and collection of other Warden's helmets, is just, for lack of a better word, cool. Things are really starting to ramp up in issue 4 and seem like they're going to continue to do so. For those action sci-fi people out there, this is a fun one. And on the topic of over-the-top action, let's pop over to Dark Horse. For Nemesis, Rogues Gallery by Mark Millar and Valerio Giangiordano. This series is a sequel to the return of Nemesis, that being in Nemesis Reloaded and then the Millarverse crossover Big Game. When I got the chance to talk to Mark Millar, he discussed how this was him rebooting Nemesis. So this Nemesis is different from the first Nemesis from 2010. Same character, but the world around him has shifted. And character-wise, Nemesis is still as extra as ever. I had quite the journey with Nemesis. I read the first series a long time ago and had mixed feelings about it because of not only all of the ultra-violence, but because of how it ended. I never forgot the series, so when it came back, I was intrigued. And the new version that focuses Matthew Anderson in more, while retaining that over-the-top edge, it clicked for me. All of the crazy things happening, they began to feel true to the character rather than as a result of the era he was created in. It became more like, oh, this is how this universe is, and so some of the satirical elements that were always there came more into focus. Nemesis takes someone out with a chicken bone in the first issue of Rogues Gallery. And there's something about it this time around that it's landing for me, whereas it didn't in 2010. Maybe I'm older, maybe it's the slight shift from the way the universe was subtly tweaked. I don't know. But for me, it's working. But if your problem with Nemesis was that it was extra, it's still very extra. Lots of violence, that same cadence to Anderson in terms of not caring about anybody or anything. So if you didn't like that, it's still the same in that regard. In this mini, he's looking for a sidekick as messed up as he is. But it's not all gore and chicken bone death. There's a Jonny Quest comic over at Dynamite. This is by Joe Casey and Sebastian Perez. This one is coming off of the free comic book day release, but you don't really need to have read that. It is a bit helpful, but they explain what it was, and then they also refer back to it with an editor's note if you want to go find it, which you can online. In this story, the Quest fam return to their home only for things to be off. Everything is too old and in disarray, so Race and Dr. Quest send the kids outside as they're wont to do. Who else remembers those Harvey Birdman episodes where they were fighting for custody of the kids? That lives rent-free in my head. Race and Dr. Quest quickly discern that time travel of some kind is afoot. This one just has a classic Quest vibe, but married with some more of the 90s sci-fi elements that came with that update on Jonny Quest. That series is where my fondness for Jonny Quest comes from. Did anybody else watch that series with the sweet reboot era computer graphics?
I hate computer games, sir.
They say the user lives outside the net and inputs games for pleasure. And they're 100% correct. This first issue was exciting and had those old school sci-fi adventure vibes, and the time travel element worked for the fact that they just kept it simple and didn't try anything fancier to subvert it. It's just there's a dark future and they need help from the past. Maybe it'll go a bit further later on, but for now, just solid foundation. Hopefully it pans out into a fun adventure. Now, if you need something more chill, let's hop over to Resident Alien, The Book of Life. This at Dark Horse. Peter Hogan is writing and Steve Parkhorse is on art. The series is back, and it has been for a while. Years ago, I did a video on Resident Alien, which is very different from its adaptational counterpart on a fundamental level because of how each presents Harry. The comic is more about blending in and loneliness, and finding oneself connecting to people in spite of oneself, in spite of trying to keep to oneself. It's not about the otherness of awkward social situations or not knowing human customs. It's not loud in that way. Harry in the comics blends quite well. His otherness is that he is different, and he knows it, something demonstrated wonderfully by the art, in that we, the reader, always see Harry as he sees himself, as an alien. However, others see him as a human. They treat him accordingly. With some exceptions who can see him, his feelings are coming largely from within. It's an understated and thematic series that I was thrilled to see return, and it still has that vibe. The Book of Life is the latest arc, because Resident Aliens released in a series of mini arcs. The latest ones post the original one are dealing with Harry and Astra's relationship largely, since Harry decided to stay on Earth. And now they have a baby, and this arc is largely about them dealing with their hybrid baby and being parents. Like I said, understated. Slice of life, then you got some mystery, some murder. You get to have all these moments with Harry and Astra and the other residents of the town. Chill vibes, even when there's murder. Less chill was Cruel Universe #1. This was from Oni Press, who is spearheading the return of EC Comics. Cruel Universe is their sci-fi outing, and it's an anthology. I was actually gonna do a video on this one, but got waylaid by other things. Gotham City Sirens coming out weekly. But I can say the stories in this one very much ranged, and it suffered a little bit from what I call Twilight Zone syndrome, which is the idea that every story has to have some kind of twist ending, perhaps with a moral, which in some cases can derail the story, or in others can make it predictable. It can be difficult to come up with a compelling twist that really lands. But there was one story in here that kind of did something different. It was the last one, Priceless, by Ben H. Winters, about a man paying another man to go out and collect experiences for him to then live vicariously through his memories. It stood out to me. But this being an anthology means that different stories are going to resonate with different people. So if you read this, let me know which one you liked or didn't like. EC really got screwed over back in the day, so it is nice to see someone attempting to bring them back, and also to see more attempts of other genres out there, which they already do, but to see a focused attempt of this is going to be a monthly sci-fi or horror anthology. The format and stuff is fine, but it feels a bit like some of them are trying to copy the exact story structure, which works better for some than others. Outside of all that, here's one of the older things I was reading and finally finished. Middlewest. This was written by Scotty Young with art by Jorge Corona. This is the complete compendium, so everything's in here, issues 1 to 18. There's also some extra things at the back. You get some behind the scenes interviews, notes. There's a whole variant cover gallery. There's also some of the designs as it was evolving. Very interesting. This series began in 2018 and ended in 2020. The story follows Abel, a young boy in a small town in this land of magical realism, who lives with his abusive father and is struck by his father, who can transform into this giant storm when out of control. This with rage. And it marks him, giving him a storm all his own. So him and his companion Fox set out to not only get away, but to find a cure. And the comic is his adventures traveling across the land, trying to find a cure, making friends, going on these kind of quest-like little journeys. He learns about its condition and what caused it and everything behind it. The whole thing is an examination and rumination on generational trauma, the way it's passed down and how to break the cycle. It's not subtle. From the beginning, it's clear that that's what it's working through. However, towards the end, post-issue, I'd say 13 or so, it starts to get very overt, to the point that by the end, characters are pretty much stating so directly, which in my opinion weakened it a bit. It was already there, and it was a bit more poetic when it was kept in the background a bit more. It helped keep the focus more on some of the land and the magic. Still, overall, this was a very fun experience. It was beautifully illustrated and read a bit like a dark fairy tale or legend because of all the quest-like elements. It doesn't conclude as satisfyingly as it could, not in that the ending doesn't make sense, because it does. It tracks from the beginning to end, but just in the sense that it's a bit abrupt. With that said, it was an enjoyable journey and overall a strong exploration of the topic it was working through. We've talked about other works by this creative team before, like The Me You Love in the Dark. If you liked that, you'll most likely like this. And finally, some Marvel things. Uncanny X-Men #1, written by Gail Simone with art by David Marquez. There were a lot of X books I had to pick. And I ended up picking a few, but this was the one that left the strongest impression. It also felt like the longest. It just kept going. It did a lot and had some highs and some baffling moments, but there were some really cool action beats, and it was nice to see the characters bantering and interacting. Gambit, Rogue, and Wolverine are a really fun trio to follow, and the setup for where they're going with all these new mutants was interesting. The art was dynamic. I'm curious to see where it goes. On the whole, Marvel this month remained fairly stable for the titles I am reading, like the Ultimate Universe and the like, Spider-Man, all those things. Others I'm still processing, like X Factor. I don't know how I feel. Now, as I said at the start of this, there was more read, but these were the things that I had things to say about, and I wanted to keep it kind of quick, rapid fire. You know, like, I read Witchblade and some other things, but I want to hear what you're reading. Let's chat down below. Share your recommendations or your to-be avoidance. It's a good time. Are you reading any of the ones I'm reading? This was a bit of an experiment. If you like it, let me know. We can do it again, maybe next month. Also, while you're down there, please share your thoughts and do all the YouTube things, like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon.